pretty shocked, as some of you probably were as well, when I saw that Bernie Sanders had an announcement. And the first thing that I assumed was, please don't tell me he's going to try to run for president again. So that actually was not the announcement. So Bernie is not running for president, but he is doing something else. And I want to get your take on this. Let's go ahead and dive in here. Here is Bernie's speech.
Let me thank the people of Vermont from the bottom of my heart for giving me the opportunity to serve in the United States Senate. It has been the honor of my life. Today, I am announcing my intention to seek another term. And let me take a few minutes to tell you why.
So Bernie Sanders has decided to run for re-election for the U.S. Senate. First and foremost, how old is Bernie Sanders now at this point? You know, like I would have assumed that if it's not a presidential announcement, he's going to announce that he is retiring. You know, he's pretty much up there in age. But no, the announcement is that he is running for re-election for the U.S. Senate. Now, listen to what he says here, because I think this is pretty revealing.
As the chairman of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, as part of the U.S. Senate Democratic leadership team, as a senior member of the Veterans Committee, the Budget Committee, and the Environment and Public Works Committee, I have been and will be, if re-elected, in a strong position to provide the kind of help that Vermonters need in these difficult times. In recent years, working together, we have made important progress in addressing some very serious challenges. But much, much more needs to be done if we are to become the state and the nation our people deserve. Together, we have made Vermont the leading state in the country in terms of per capita utilization of community health centers. That means that up to 190,000 Vermonters every year are receiving their primary health care, their dental care, their mental health counseling, and lower cost prescription drugs at these centers.
So this is something I want to mention here as well. Part of the reason why Bernie Sanders does continue to get reelected is because if you actually go to Vermont, and I go to Vermont usually in the summer, at least once a year. If you actually go to Vermont, a lot of people in Vermont really do love Bernie Sanders, not because of his presidential races, but because of some of the things that he's been able to accomplish for people in Vermont. So that's why a lot of people there like him. Now, granted, his office was just set on fire. I think it was like a couple weeks ago. I don't know what that was all about. But a lot of people there do like him. Not all Vermonters like him, though. You'll go to Vermont, believe it or not, you can go to Vermont and you'll also see Trump signs. There are also Trump supporters in Vermont, you know, so not everybody is in love with Bernie Sanders in Vermont, but he does have a favorable rating there.
But that is not enough. In my view, the United States must join every other major country on earth in guaranteeing health care to all of our people as a human right, not a privilege. And that's a fight we must continue to wage. Together, we have begun the process of lowering the cost of prescription drugs. We're making insulin more affordable to seniors and all those struggling with diabetes. We're lowering the cost of inhalers for those with asthma and COPD. We're finally beginning to negotiate prices with the big drug companies. But that is not enough. We need to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and end the absurdity of Americans paying by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs.
And we are not going to be able to do that by supporting and endorsing establishment candidates that are unwilling to support Medicare for all or any type of universal healthcare program in this country. So that leads to this question: why is Bernie Sanders still endorsing those types of candidates? So I think the question we need to ask ourselves at this point in time, is it helpful to have Bernie Sanders in the Senate, or is it harmful? There's a couple of examples I can bring up, one being Yemen to mention. Let's start with foreign policy, right? Remember, earlier, I think it was late last year, Bernie Sanders was supposed to bring a bill to the Senate, to the floor, to stop, obviously, the slaughter in Yemen and to completely exit. You know, the U.S. government gave those weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia used those weapons on people in Yemen. Yemen is an absolute disaster. You can look these pictures up for yourself. And Bernie Sanders was basically tapped on the shoulder by Joe Biden, who told him, don't do it because it's not going to pass. That's one example of foreign policy. Another example of foreign policy, when it comes to Gaza, Bernie Sanders was one of the last people to call for a ceasefire. And this is after people like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and even AOC had called for the ceasefire. He didn't want to utter those words. Bernie Sanders was one of the last people to advocate for some type of self-determination for the Palestinian people, again, late to the table. So at this point in time, is it more helpful or more harmful to have Bernie Sanders in the Senate? Is it time to pass this over to another generation? If everybody else is beating you to the most important issues and they're correct on the issue, you're dead last, then you need to start asking yourself that question. I think it was quite embarrassing to see even some establishment Democrats call for a ceasefire before Bernie Sanders was willing to do so.
Earlier this year, we saw devastating flooding across our state, further illustrating the deadly effects of climate change. And I will tell you that visiting the communities impacted in Berrien, Montpelier, and Weston, Ludlow, and other towns, and talking with Vermonters who had lost their homes and businesses, that was a painful experience. Together, we must continue to combat climate change by transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy.
How are you going to fight back against climate change if you're endorsing people like Joe Biden, who is saying he's taking measures to, help with climate change, but at the same time, he's also causing more harm, right? So Joe Biden did sign off on the Willow Project. This was after he said he would not sign on any more, approve any more projects that were going to include more drilling, but he did that anyway. Okay, so I want you to listen to the things that Bernie Sanders is saying, and then I want you to think about his actions, because the thing that politicians do very well is that they are very good speakers. They're really great at saying the things that you want to hear. But you have to think about legislation. You have to think about how do they vote. You have to think about their actions. And when it comes to Bernie Sanders' actions, yeah, he's been good on some issues, but he's also flip-flopped on some other issues because he doesn't want to push back against the establishment in the Democratic Party.
I'm proud that I was able to bring $62 million into the state to help our people afford solar panels for their rooftops and additional money for heat pumps. But that is not enough. This is a global crisis. We must work with every country on Earth to cut carbon emissions and save the planet for our kids and future generations. As the former chair of the Veterans Committee, I am proud of the role my office has played in making sure that veterans in our state get the quality health care they deserve, whether it's at the White River Junction Medical Center or community-based outpatient clinics around the state. And I'm excited about major new VA health clinics, which will be built both in Chittenden County and for Vermont veterans in the southern part of our state.
See, this is, again, why he has a pretty high approval rating in the state of Vermont, because he's done a lot for people in Vermont. And speaking of healthcare for veterans, I can tell you from, firsthand experience, the VA has been awful for veterans. I'm talking about mounds and mounds of paperwork, asking them to come back over and over again, come back 6 months later. We're talking about, veterans that are dealing with PTSD, veterans that have been injured, in war, that type of thing. The VA is slow. It's slow, honey. And that is something that needs to be fixed all across the country, not just in Vermont. It's a terrible system, the way that they treat the veterans after they've fought for their country.
But that is not enough. We must vigorously oppose those who want to privatize the VA and make sure that every veteran gets the quality care and the benefits they have earned. I am proud of my 100% lifetime voting record in defense of women's rights and the absolute need for women to control their own bodies. And I'm proud of Vermont for becoming the first state to enshrine abortion rights in our Constitution. But that is not enough. We must codify Roe v. Wade into national law and do everything possible to oppose the well-funded right-wing effort to roll back the gains that women have achieved after decades of struggle. No more second-class citizenship for the women of Vermont or America. I'm proud of the role my office has played in canceling student debt for millions of Americans, including nearly 6,500 here in Vermont. But that's not enough. In a highly competitive global economy, we need to make sure that all public colleges and universities are tuition-free and that every Vermonter, regardless of income, can get the higher education they need to pursue their dreams.
Well, Bernie, that's not going to happen if you keep endorsing candidates that are obviously in favor of the high, that was a bad place to pause that, but in favor of the high defense budget that we have. They're still supporting these wars abroad, some of them which you actually voted for, by the way. You know, when you think about all the money that is invested in our defense budget, if we were to cut that bloated defense budget, just think about the things that we could do for people in this country. When it comes to funding the war in Ukraine, when it comes to funding Israel, funding all these military coups abroad, there's so much more money that we could actually keep in this country and help people here. And we could have those free colleges and universities. But also, you can't forget this as well, which Bernie Sanders isn't going to tell you. One of the reasons why we don't have free public colleges in this country is because that would actually hurt military recruitment. They don't want you to know this, but I know this. That's one of the benefits of joining the military, right? Is that the military, if you're coming out of college, they'll pay off your student loans to a certain point. There is a maximum amount there. So there's that. But also that if you go into the military and you can also later on take college courses, et cetera, the military will cover that as well. So that's one of the recruitment methods that they use, particularly when they're trying to recruit low income high school students in Black and brown neighborhoods. That's one of the methods that they use. It's the same thing with healthcare, by the way. It's not just the pharmaceutical companies that we have to fight. So I'm going to tell you the part that Bernie Sanders is also leaving out. If we were to give everyone universal health care in this country, that would also hurt the military recruitment process. This is another one of those things that oftentimes is not mentioned. That's another benefit that is offered by the military when they are trying to recruit those young kids. So as long as you are supporting, you're in favor of those war efforts abroad, as long as you're voting on legislation in such a way that allow those war efforts to continue, well, then you're part of the problem. That's a big part of the problem, which Bernie Sanders has done. When I supported Bernie when he ran for president, I never said he was perfect. I didn't have this show at that point in time, but I never said he was perfect. And I did criticize some things about his campaign, but I said there are some things that I think he needs to mention that he's leaving out, but that's intentional. That is very intentional. So people have to be very much aware of that. You can't sit up here and both sides, the Gaza situation, Bernie Sanders. So I just don't understand at this point in time, what good is it to keep Bernie Sanders in the Senate at this point in time? Dude's going to be almost 90, right? We're talking about what, 80%? He's getting up there. Why are all these people continuing to hold on to these congressional seats? And I feel that if Bernie Sanders really cared so much about the young people as he says that he does, then he would take this moment and he would step aside and he would actually allow someone younger, someone a little bit more empowered and inspired to come into that seat. But Bernie Sanders isn't willing to do that. A lot of these senators and congressmen are not willing to do that. We watched Dianne Feinstein sat up there. Basically, she couldn't even communicate. She was basically on her deathbed at that point in time, and they still kept this woman in the seat. It makes absolutely no sense. They do not want the younger generation to get in because they don't want change. And Bernie Sanders doesn't want as much change as he claims, because if he wanted this change, like for real, then he wouldn't be supporting Joe Biden. He wouldn't be supporting someone who's a part of the establishment, someone who's taken millions of dollars from AIPAC. He would tell all of his supporters to get behind a third party or independent effort, and he would get behind that as well. And he would organize what's left of his base to do the same thing. But he doesn't really want real change. His job is to keep you in the Democratic Party. That's what Bernie Sanders does.
Further, we need to break our dependence on the regressive property tax in the funding of local schools. I am proud of my leadership role in defending Social Security and Medicare from those who would cut benefits for our seniors. No, we don't need to cut benefits. We need to expand them, and we can do that by demanding that the very wealthy start paying their fair share of taxes into the Social Security Trust Fund. I am proud of some of the innovative housing programs we've introduced over the years and the millions of housing dollars we brought into the state. This includes the National Housing Trust Fund, a national program modeled after the Burlington Community Land Trust, now the Champlain Housing Trust, which puts federal funds to work to create safe, perpetually affordable housing. But that's not enough. We have a
Pause. Affordable housing is a scam. I have to call this out. I've interviewed a number of people on the show that have been a part of these affordable housing efforts. That's a scam. Affordable housing, affordable to who? A lot of times they'll call it affordable housing, but the average person that's working like a minimum wage job or just the average working class person can't even afford to either get in, or they can't get in because they don't meet that narrow income bracket that you have to be a part of in order to participate in the application process. So affordable housing is a scam. Let's stop saying we need more affordable housing or we're building more affordable housing. And let's start saying we need housing for everybody regardless. And this is something that if you go to some of these other countries, if you go to like Finland, for example, they don't have this issue because everybody has housing. These are things that can be done in this country. Don't listen to what a lot of the politicians are telling you when they tell you we don't have the money. We have watched them over the past 2.5 years, send billions of dollars to Ukraine. We have watched them send $3.8 billion a year to Israel before October 7th. The money is there. The money has always been there. But you have to understand that the capitalist class, more so the oligarchs that are really much in charge, they don't want that to happen. They don't want everyone to have a home. And the reason why they don't want that is because it doesn't support their financial interests. And those oligarchs are a part of companies and corporations that donate to the politicians that sit on the Hill. So Bernie Sanders talks a good game. I know I fell for this too when he was running. He talks a good game. But when the metal hits the road, Bernie Sanders is not willing to be more of a radical and say, no, we cannot continue to keep doing the same thing that we have been doing. It's time to break away from the two-party system. And it's time to move towards something that's actually going to benefit the people.
A major housing crisis today that must be addressed. No Vermonter should be paying 40 or 50% of his or her income to put a roof over their heads. And there's one other issue that I know is very much on the minds of Vermonters. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas, a terrorist organization, began the war in Gaza with a horrific attack on Israel that killed 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, and took more than 230 hostages, some of whom remain in captivity today. Israel had the absolute right to defend itself against this terrorist attack, but it did not and does not have the right to go to war against the entire Palestinian people, which is exactly what it is doing.
But that's exactly what they've been doing. And this is the part where Bernie Sanders, I don't know if I'm going to say disingenuous or just flat out not being honest. That is what they have been doing, whether it has been the West Bank, whether it has been Gaza, whether it has been, shooting at peaceful protesters when they were protesting for the right to return years ago, whether it has been removing people from their homes in the West Bank. This is what Israel has been doing all along. So Bernie Sanders is conveniently leaving out the history so that he can keep the seat that he has. And I have to ask this question: as old as Bernie Sanders is, why wouldn't you want to retire at this point in time? Because I'll be damned. If it was me, I would say, once I hit retirement age, that's it. That's a wrap. What was it? The Chappelle skit where it said, wrap it up. That's it. I'm out. Why do you still need to be there? And what do they have on Bernie Sanders? Do they have something on Bernie Sanders? Is that why he's forced to stay in this seat? I don't understand this. It does not make any sense to me. So to me, I just kind of feel like, listen to the way that he's framing even that issue.
34,000 Palestinians have already been killed and 77,000 have been wounded, 70% of whom are women and children.
But notice how he doesn't call that horrific. He had called the assault on the 1,200 Israeli people horrific attack, but he's not calling the assault on the Palestinian people, which is over 40,000. I would say it's probably over 50,000. Okay, because all the people from the rubble have not been recovered. I would say it's probably over 50,000. That number is way higher. The Palestinian people are not in charge. They do not have an army, but he's not willing to call that horrific. So do you see what Bernie is doing? He's making you think that he supports the Palestinian people having some type of self-determination, and he's upset about what's happening to them. But don't get it twisted. Bernie Sanders is still pro-Israel. That's right, folks. Some people won't say it. I'll say it.
According to humanitarian organizations, famine and starvation are now imminent. In my view, U.S. tax dollars should not be going to the extremist Netanyahu government to continue its devastating war against the Palestinian people.
Notice is how he frames that. It should not go towards the Netanyahu government. Instead of it should not go to Israel, period. We should not be funding Israel, period.
Let me conclude by telling you what you already know. These are very difficult times for our country and the world. And in many ways, this 2024 election is the most consequential election in our lifetimes.
This man has said this going all the way back to 2016, as far as I can remember. Hillary Clinton, it was most important election. 2016, 2020, most important election. 2024, most important election. Same playbook.
Will the United States continue to even function as a democracy? Or will we move to an authoritarian form of government? Will we reverse the unprecedented level of income and wealth inequality that now exists? Or will we continue to see billionaires get richer while working families struggle to put food on the table?
That's happening under Joe Biden as well. You know, this is not something that is unique to the Republican Party because both parties are corporate. This is happening under Joe Biden as well.
Can we create a government that works for all of us?
No, not as long as you continue to tell people to support and endorse the establishment candidate. So let me say something really quick here, folks, before I forget, because I almost forgot last time. Let me say something here really quick. Bernie Sanders is there to continue to get the younger voters to support the Democratic Party. That is his role. That's why he's there. He's there to get you excited about the possibility of more progressive ideas and policies in this country, which I do believe Bernie Sanders does believe in those ideas. He's been talking about those for decades, right? But at the same time, Bernie Sanders also knows that he's not going to win for any type of presidential election. He knew that when he ran in 2020. I would argue that he knew that the Democratic Party was not going to let him have this. So what is Bernie Sanders' role? His role is to get the youth vote to come out and support the Democratic Party. And I believe part of the reason why he's running for re-election for U.S. Senate is because he is going to be used as a tool of the Biden administration to go out and round up those young voters that Joe Biden has lost because of his behavior towards Gaza. He's going to round up those people and try to get them to come out and support Joe Biden. And he's going to use it using the same language that he just said today. Do you want an authoritarian government? Do you want to protect democracy? Not realizing these young folks aren't thinking about no damn democracy. They're thinking about what is happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza. They're thinking about the economy. These are things that are on their mind right now. That is Bernie Sanders' role. That's why he's staying there. That's why he's running for re-election. That's why. Because there's no one else. They need him because he has a bigger name recognition. There's AOC as well, but Bernie Sanders has large name recognition. He's the one that was able to get hundreds of thousands of people at rallies. Joe Biden did not. So they are going to use him, get him to stay in that seat so that they can get him to go out and rile up the young base again.
Will our political system continue to be dominated by wealthy campaign contributors? These are just some of the questions that together we need to answer, and that I look forward to discussing with you on the campaign trail. Once again, thank you very much for the support that many of you have given me in the past. As I enter this campaign, I look forward to your continued support.
Another independent needs to challenge Bernie Sanders in Vermont. Another independent or third-party candidate needs to challenge him. Bernie's days are done. It's time for Bernie to go. Time for Bernie to go.